fall meeting, and thank you so much for coming. We've got a very exciting day ahead. Last night we had Eric Baker from Widener University. Sorry, I had a mental block there. I wasn't able to go, but I heard that it was a very exciting, right, Jeremy? Yeah. Great meeting. Today we're going to have Eric Brewe, Dr. Eric Brewe from Drexel University. We'll also have a Zoom meet with NEED. NEED is the National Energy Education Development Project. And we'll have Mary Brewe from who's the Executive Director that's telling about some of the resources that we have at NEED. And then in the afternoon, we have contributed talks, posters and demos, which sounds very exciting. So, without further ado, hopefully I can work this. Okay, here we go. This is some information about the AAPT SEPS. It is a national organization, and we are the SEPS, which is the regional section, which is roughly 5 counties surrounding Philadelphia. Okay, I'm not going to read this to you, but this is some information about the national AAPT. Amber, is Amber here? Amber, you're our representative?
Yes.
Is there any words of wisdom you'd like to give?
So the AAPT, the National Society, is always interested in having you as a, there you go. The National Society version of the AAPT is always interested in having you as a member, and the AAPT is especially interested in recruiting teachers coming from secondary education. This used to be a mainstay of the membership in AAPT, and it has been delivering over the years. So if this is something that you're thinking about, I'm more than happy to tell you more about the National Society. And if there is a specific reason why you have chosen not to join the AAPT, please let me know. If you have opinions on that, and then I can take that back to the National Society as well, and perhaps we can make it a better place, more suitable for you. So, of course, anything you want to know about the National Society, I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you. Okay. Alice, do you want to forward the screen? Oh. Okay, I think we're good there. So let's talk a little bit about us. We are a mixture of high school and university folks, 50-50. We already had our spring meeting at Chestnut Academy. What's the full name? Chestnut. Beautiful, thank you. And this is now our fall meeting. There's periodic workshops, jobs postings, email discussion, and it's a $10 membership. You want to do that? Okay, and I think I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Paula Miller. I teach at Abraham Lincoln High School in the school district of Philadelphia. And our vice principal, Ryan, would you like to stand up? This is Ryan over here. And of course, we have Alice, and I want to give a huge shout out to Alice because she did a phenomenal job. Allowing Widener did an awesome job, beautiful campus, and thank you for putting this all together and hosting it. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And I think all of us met Mark. Is Mark in here or is he still outside? Still outside. There's Mark, our treasurer, popping in. We already met Amber. Jeremy, where's Jeremy? He's hiding. Jeremy, I want to also thank you. He was our past president from last year, and he did an awesome job helping me. And the rest of the board members, I'm not going to mention it because I'll forget somebody's name and then I'll be upset with myself. But, you know, thank you so much for helping me put this together. And our web maestro is over here, Mark. He is also going to be taking photographs today, right, Mark? Okay, the next slide, I am going to hand it over to you.
Oh, okay.
Here you go.
Okay, thank you. I'm Shin. I'm an assistant professor at Widener in the physics department. Today I'm gonna briefly introduce Widener University to you because I think it's a good opportunity to let people know about Widener. So we are a private school, so we have a small class size and a small student to faculty ratio, and we offer multiple diverse pathway programs to students. And then the students at Widener, usually we have most of them have an opportunity to different academic opportunities, including research, internship in industry. And then we also offer personal student success support. We give students support in all different aspects. And then we offer good campus life, thriving, vibrant campus life. And the physics department at Widener, we have a full-time faculty. And then we do research in astronomy, soft matter physics, granular materials, fluid dynamics. This physics student will have an opportunity to do research in our physics lab, and then we offer co-op in industry for students who we offer dual major opportunities for engineering and physics majors. So welcome to Widener. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to host this event. I had a great experience last year attending the AAPT meeting. I got an opportunity to learn about the visiting faculty program at DOE. And then I had a chance to talk with people who work who work in that program. And then this past summer, I had a chance to work at Brookhaven National Lab and had a great experience. And so I think it's this AAPT, our staff session, provide great opportunity for faculty to have their professional development. Thank you.
The next, I'd like to introduce our speaker. It's Dr. Eric Brewe.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Can you hear me now? No. Okay. All right. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day. He is Dr. Eric Brewe. And Dr. Eric Brewe is a professor of physics and science education at Drexel University. His research into the teaching and learning of physics at the university level includes developing curriculum for modeling instruction course, leading inquiries into the role of modeling instruction in promoting student learning, participation, retention, and persistence, enhanced attitudes towards science, and equity. This research has led to describing the role of participation in learning using primarily quantitative measures, including the use of network analysis and recently applications of machine learning and natural language processing. Dr. Brewe was chosen as a fellow of the American Physical Society in 2019. Beginning in July 2023, Dr. Brewe has been an associate editor with the Physical Review Physics Education Research, very prestigious journal to publish physics education research. And this is just what made it into his bio. I have personally gotten to interact and work with Dr. Brewe in the American Physical Society. Last year, he was chair of the Forum on Education. So that bio was just the short list of what he's done. So I'd like to now invite Dr. Brewe to tell us more about his research.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you all for inviting me and for being here. All right, so, oops, I'm stepping on something. I need to get this. All right, and so now I need to share the screen, correct? Or is it being shared? Okay. Open twice. That's exciting. All right, I think we can see.
Yes.
So again, thank you all. My name's Eric. I'm a professor at Drexel University. I'm 75% in the physics department and 25% in the School of Education. I'm hoping if I can navigate the parking system, we can get Drexel to host this meeting at some point in the next year or two. But that requires me navigating the parking system. So apologies there. So I want to start. Oh, wait. Why don't I do this? That's it. And now we need to go back here and share the screen. Ooh, which one do you think it was? That one. Yeah. Okay, so I do want to start by acknowledging I run a small research group at Drexel, and we are always looking. I am actively recruiting graduate students, and if there are some high school teachers that are interested in participating in action research or those sorts of things, my group would be happy to have people play along. So this is my group, my postdoc, Megan Sundstrom, 3 graduate students, Justin, Max, and Colin. Small but mighty. The other thing is that the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today could not have been done without the neuroinformatics and brain connectivity lab at Florida International University. I've been in Pennsylvania for nearly 10 years now, but only at Drexel since 2017. Before that, I was at Florida International. So all of this work actually took place in Florida, but we're continuing it now. So it's annoying that there it is. That's better. All right. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about modeling instruction. Presumably, many of you know of modeling instruction at the high school level. I went to Arizona State University where I worked with David Hestenes. And the very first thing that we were to do was to take all of the good stuff from high school and try and turn it into a college class. And so that's where my research really started. And it took me a long time to understand, to the extent that I do now, why I think it works. And so it works because modeling is not actually a theory about teaching, it's a theory about science. And that the basic premise is that modeling is science is a modeling endeavor. No matter what science you're doing, we're looking to build models. And so here are some examples of some models you might want to build. You know, bizarre particles keep flying out of Antarctica's ice, and they might shatter modern physics. So this is just a headline that indicates, look, we have this model that should not predict that these bizarre particles should be coming from this ice. And when it happens, we have to change our models. And so there's an example of a model where you're using the model to try and understand, or we're trying to build or break this model essentially so that we can understand why these particles are flying out of the ice. Here's another type. Oh, we have 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe. This was probably 4 years ago, so we're down to 8. That's not funny. But here, the idea is that they've got a model, and they're using that model to predict and project forward into the future, trying to understand, future consequences. And some models are used just to answer the most important types of questions, like how bad is bacon for you, really? So science is a modeling endeavor. And if that's the case, then we ought to think about, well, what does that mean? So we've brought it back, or brought it down to basically 4-ish things. So within a cycle, we see that groups of scientists create new models. They test and they validate these models using experimental means. They deploy these models to new situations. So once you've got something that sort of works, let's make sure that it works in different contexts, different situations. And then ultimately, the goal is to break it and to find new models that do a better job in some regard. And so ultimately, you want to be revising these models. And so if the idea is that this is how science progresses, then we ought to know a couple things. First of all, we ought to think about what is a model. And so I'm going to give you a variety of answers from the literature. My advisor, David Hessness, always talks about models as an abstract representation of structure, which is sort of it's very pithy, it's very elegant, and it doesn't tell me anything. And so I don't think he's wrong, but I don't think he goes quite far enough. So there's another group that is, they work in physics, but they're cognitive scientists, and they talk about models mediating thought, so that that's what the things do. There's some historians of science that look at models as constructs that stand in for phenomena, and that there's something there that kind of makes sense. And then there's groups out of biology that are like, oh, no, we think that models are there to allow for people to explore things that they've never experienced before. So as a way to explore new phenomena. So that's all well and good, but clearly I didn't define it that way. So this is from it's from a paper we wrote with a graduate student. We'll talk more about this. So here's my definition, and I'll let you read it. But it's not very long. It's not very short. But as we point out in the paper, that it does fit on a t-shirt, so we think it must be good enough. But essentially, what we are trying to say is that we want to know what these models are built up of. We want to know where they live, because if you want to measure something, you ought to have some sense about where it exists. And we ought to know something about the purpose. And so this is sort of the diagram that I really like, because essentially the way that we're going to talk about these models is most of the things that we'll be doing, most of the physics education research work lives over on the left-hand side, right? Where it's looking at interactions of people, or interactions of people with a test. So taking data that exists in what we'll call sort of a behavioral world or a social world, so that the process of building the model is a social process, and it's really focused heavily on that left side. That's the stuff we observe. However, inside each of us, there's a process where we take the things that are happening in the social world and we build them into our own sort of scientific mental models. All right. And so the modeling that happens on the left is social. The modeling that happens on the right is, in my mind, that's in the mental space, and that happens, I think, mostly in the brain. There are other competing theories about that, but we'll talk about brains today. So the reason I'm talking about this so much right now is that we're really going to focus the rest of the time on, well, not this, but some of the rest of the time on the right-hand side, where we look at this process where you see what's happening and you make that into your brain. And so often when we do physics education research, we're trying to infer what types of models people have, but it's an inference process, right? We don't have any direct evidence that it is happening. We see behavior, and the behavior is consistent with a set of models, but we don't have any evidence about what's actually happening inside the brain. And we expect that what's happening in your brain and your brain are different. And so we're going to try and explore some of what that looks like. So this is my definition of a model. And it's not very elegant, but it does do the three things that I wanted to do. Number one, it tells me what it's made up of. It's made up of representations. That it's there to mediate thought. I think that that's actually a pretty accurate way of thinking about it. You use these models to help you think. And that where does it live? It lives in the social domain of discourse. So when we see people talking about, for example, the standard model, everybody can, if I say the standard model, people in here may have some sort of sense about what I'm talking about. But it's not all the same, and you might remember one thing, and you might remember a different. This is the different appropriations of that model. But the basic model, the standard model, that exists in this shared, I say it, and you all have an idea about it. And so that's why I talk about it in this social discourse, this domain of social discourse. So we built an instructional program that is built around these ideas. So to try and focus instruction on the process of building models. We think that scientists build models, test models, use models, and then ultimately revise models. That's how we should design instruction, to engage students as scientists in that fairly authentic way. And so we built up a curriculum, and it sort of goes like this, right? So we have some small group activity. It can be a lab, it can be a conceptual activity, it can be problem solving, where students work in small groups, and they're sort of like their own little research group trying to answer whatever question I'll throw at them. And then, at the end of this, they write things down, because remember, we have to be careful about working in this shared discourse space. So we need them to be publishing papers. So their little whiteboards are their research findings in a lot of ways. And then they'll get together and they'll go to a conference, and they will present their research results using these small portable whiteboards. And as you do at a conference, you look at the posters and you say, oh, this is good, or this is the same as what I'm doing, and this is different than what I'm doing. And you might ask some questions. And this is the way we mostly teach the class. And so this is my friend Jeff Potvin at Florida International, and you can see he's got there's sort of one group right here, and then there's a separate circle back there that's talking to a different instructor. And so we can run basically 100-student classroom in this. And so then the students are there presenting, and they are there talking about what they've learned on their whiteboards. And so this might be the kind of thing that they would present. And I like this one because it's really clear, very colorful, and it's got lots of representation. So remember, I said that these models are built up of representation. Well, they've got graphs, but they've also got equations. They've established their assumptions using words. They've got a motion diagram down there, and they're all working together. They're all coherent together. And actually, that's what we see as sort of the key indicator of a quality model, is that it's that it's coherent. And so this is the kind of thing that they will put together. And over 2 decades now, we've been collecting evidence about how effective these classes are. And we've written papers about how it improves conceptual understanding and it improves attitudes about learning physics. And we can talk about persistence rates. And I can talk about all of these different things. But the short version is that we have lots of evidence that students are learning, and they are learning differently than they do when they learn in a lecture form. So if this is the case, then we think that one of the reasons that this might be happening is that we have this belief, or we have this curriculum that's been built up on an epistemology, on an understanding of where knowledge comes from. And so if we think that this is happening, then, and we know that students are learning, we ought to then also explore the right side of that diagram. So we're going to try and go and look inside of brains to see what's happening. Now, this is an underspecified question, but we're going to try and look at it. And so can we look at physics reasoning in brains? And can we identify instructional differences? So do brains change as a result of physics instruction? And can we, and this is the holy grail, is to find the evidence of these models inside of brains. Because we know we've got a lot of evidence that's from the shared discourse world. We now have to look inside the brain. And so Halloween's coming, so it's time to talk about brains. And my children always prefer it when I put a meme inside a talk. So again, this is where I have to, I want to do two things. Remember, these colleagues are fantastic. They're really great people. They're very, very smart. And I am not a neuroscientist. I just happen to be good friends with some neuroscientists. And so this is the nature of modern science, is that I don't know 2/3 of what I'm about to talk about. So let's see how it goes. So the group at Florida International, they now have their own MRI. When we did this study, we didn't have but essentially, I'll talk you through the ways in which we use functional neuroimaging to functional MRIs to look at how brains change. And so essentially, what we do is we do a scan at the beginning of the semester and a scan at the end. And anytime you do a scan, scanning is very expensive, hard to schedule, and it's relying on college students to show up when you ask them to show up. So, proceed with caution. But whenever you do that, you also do. We also did a battery of of other types of tests, and some of them. One of them, this is one of the things I love about science, is you learn things that you had no idea and why those things are. But one of the tests that we have to have them do is we do a handedness test, because all neuroimaging is done on right-handed people. Did you know that? Not all, but 99% of it, because left-handed people's brains are organized differently. Who knew? So if you get less than a 0.8 on the handedness scale, you can't be in this study. Yeah. So in the MRI, we have students lay flat on their back, and then we project these questions on a special mirror, and they respond with a 4-finger keypad, and the questions are projected on a mirror. And this keypad can't have capacitors because it's in very high magnetic field, so it's very expensive. It's like the most expensive keypad you can imagine. And I want to point out that we're going to talk about FCI results. Those of you know that FCI, you might remember that it has 5 answers, but we only have 4 buttons. So we had to make some decisions. And so these are just weird things that happen when you do these neuroimaging studies. So the goal of the fMRI is to take essentially a million, so it divides the brain up into a volume element, a voxel, and then it takes a picture every basically 2 seconds, looking for the hemodynamic response. So essentially the idea is when you are thinking, your brain requires extra oxygen, and that flow of extra oxygen indicates the regions of the brain that are active during special parts of thinking. Now, your entire brain is not active when you're thinking. Most of it is just waiting around. But we can look very pretty carefully at the how the blood flow changes. And so we'll be talking about bold signal, blood oxygenation level dependent analysis. So, and the basic idea is that what we do is we give them a task. We give them 3 or 4 different types of tasks, and then we let them rest. And part of it is you have to time very carefully, like, oh, I showed them this, and then the response is a timed response. So that's how we go about getting the data. Once we've got the data, there's a bunch of stuff we have to do. First of all, we have to do skull stripping, which is awesome. It's just what happens. And then each brain is slightly different. And so we do this process where we map the parts of your brain onto a standardized brain. And so there's a mapping to a brain atlas, and you have to be careful about which atlas you use. And then there's all kinds of noise problems. We have to do a lot of masking to get stuff that we don't want. Anytime a patient or a participant's head moves, that causes problems. And then we have to make sure that the timing of the stimulus is connected to the time of the response. And so we do all of that in the pre-processing. And then there's sort of 2 ways the data are analyzed. The first way is a statistical, just a statistical approach, where you look at areas where the brain correlates with the task. And so essentially what you're doing is you're saying, in one condition, so the task, let's subtract off some sort of control. So like, for example, we'll talk about FCI, so that's physics reasoning, and we'll do a control where we look at physics recall. So, in one situation, you might be trying to reason about what forces are present in a Newton's third law situation, and in the recall situation, you're asked something like, do you remember what Newton's third law is, or something like that? Because we want to be able to identify the part that is active during reasoning, but we have to recognize that also involves other mental activity, so we have to subtract that off. So we'll do this subtraction in lots of different ways. We'll do task versus recall. We'll do the post versus the pre. So we'll look at the same stimuli in the beginning and then at the end. And essentially what you end up with are maps of where blood flow is heightened. So that's the first part. And in either case, the data are images. The second way that the data are analyzed, and this is sort of a new and emerging thing, is through functional connectivity. And it's using graph theory to drive the analysis and to look for how different areas are active simultaneously, and if we see networks that work together. So these are some of the analyses that we would do, and I'm going to talk about 3 studies. The first one is a task validation, and we were looking to just make sure that the task we developed was working, and we'll do that by looking at reasoning patterns. The second study is just a comparison of students in the modeling instruction classroom and see how they are changing. And then the third study is the one we'll call the big spicy burrito, which is the big comparison of modeling to lecture. And we'll talk about that near the end. So for the first study, in all 3 of these studies, we had 107 student participants that completed pre and post instruction scanning. 48 of them are female, 59 male. 55 of them were from the modeling instruction class, and 52 were from the lecture class. And so this just, we're not neuroimagers in this room. This is a fairly large study. People publish on like 8. So we're at 108. So this is the kind of thing that we would show them in the scanner. So on the left is the FCI question that we've adapted to be used in the scanner. And notice it shows up in 3 parts because we want to be able to pay attention to what they're doing in each part. So during the first part, they're reading the question and looking at the diagram, or reading the scenario and looking at the diagram. During the second part, we add the question, but not the answer options. And then during the third part, we give the answer. And so we think that there might be differences in what they're doing at each time. And so that's the FCI, and that's the one where we want them, we expect that they are reasoning. And then on the right-hand side is a control situation, which is that, look, it's a baseline question that it is visually similar, which is important so that we can engage sort of the same things. It's roughly the same length in terms of number of words and lexile difficulty. And then it's got the same pattern. It's, situation, question, options. And so this is the reason we need to do this, is that this is that subtractive process. We want to be able to, in order to answer the question, they have to move one of their 4 fingers, right? That requires blood flow. Well, we don't care about that. We don't want our answer to be about what it looks like when you move one of your 4 fingers. We want to know what the reasoning part is. So this allows us to get some of those parts out of there. All right, so study 1 is the task validation. So essentially, you have to slice these data in as many ways as possible because it's a very expensive project to run. So in this case, we are using post data only, and we're looking at reasoning minus control. So we're trying to take are we able to look at student reasoning? And so do we see areas that are more active during reasoning versus recall? And we think that there are a variety of competing theories about why there might be, what might happen when students give wrong answers. So, are they just drawing on things that they've already thought through? So it's sort of like compiled computer code. It's, you hit it and you see this and you just sort of know the answer. Is it drawing on their physical intuition? Because these are questions that they would have some physical experience with. Or is it that they're using some set of resources to analyze the situation and analyze a new situation? And then the last way we're going to look at it is, do we see differences based on right and wrong answers? Yeah.
You say post-it, you mean like after they've taken the course?
Yeah, this is after they've taken physics, because we were working on some assumptions, and we have to test these assumptions. And one of the big assumptions is that the task we've developed works reasonably well, which is, and so the assumption is that at the end, after they've gone through a class, we expect that would be the place we would see the maximum difference. So they have the capacity to reason about the physics. So that's why we chose the post data in that case. So and these are our data. And so first of all, is that you can see on the top line, well, I'll point out a couple things. First, we didn't see any differences based on correctness. So they are engaging the same parts of their brain, whether they're answering the question correctly or incorrectly. And so what this suggests to us is that not only are they, that suggests that actually what they're doing is not using compiled knowledge or physical intuition, but instead deploying some resources because that requires a more significant mental load, right? So the no differences in correctness was an exciting result. And then we saw that there were different areas of the brain connected to different phases of the question. So when you look at all phases together, that's that top line in red. Neuroimagers put all of their data all on one slide, and it's really difficult to read. And I don't know what any of these brain regions are, so we'll get that. But you see during phase one, where they're reading the scenario, that has one layer of activation. And then during the second part, where they're asked the question, that's actually the one we think that a lot of the reasoning is taking place, right? So we see different areas active during phase two. And then during phase three, when they're trying to compare different answers, then that's a whole different set. And then we can even, since we have a fairly large number, we can compare based on difficulty. And I don't actually remember that. But you can see that there are differences based on, you know, the FCI situation versus the control situation. And what this indicates to us is that we can, our task is working and that we can interpret these results. And so what you do then, because you've mapped this to a common atlas of brains, then you go ahead and you say, oh, what are the parts of, you know, like when that part of the brain is active, what kinds of things are they doing? And this is all done through meta-analysis. And what we found is that the greatest differences were in the default mode, which is sort of a problem-solving. It's one that's engaged a lot. But then two others. One was memory, which is perhaps not surprising. You know, they're trying to remember. Maybe are there times that you have seen this? Or attention, so paying careful attention to what's happening. But the one that I'm most excited about is the visuospatial perception. And so there are areas of the brain that are often linked to this visuospatial perception. And if you think back to what are models made of, well, if we think that they're made up of representation, then there's some rationale that the visuospatial part should be more active if they are more adept as modelers. And so that we see this was a good indication, and we feel very good about this. We took all of the answers that they could have given, and we did some fancy clustering basically, and we tried to put them into groups. And what we were able to see is that even across different groups, we saw they were using different parts of their brain. And this one we feel a little less confident about, but I'm going to skip it. All right, so on to study number 2. So now we want to actually go ahead and say, well, if we think that our task is working, can we see differences from pre to post instruction? And so for this, I'm only looking at the modeling instruction students. We're going to look at pre and post data. We're going to use the reasoning versus control situation. And we're going to look for instruction effects. So are there areas that are more active in the modeling instructions? Post instruction versus pre, and what areas do we see? And do we see any differences, again, based on right or wrong? So here, all of our data are on this one. So in the task effect, so we saw that are they reasoning more in cases where we're expecting them to answer physics problems versus physics recall? And we can see that there are areas that are so attention, working memory, spatial reasoning, and then mathematical cognition. And so these are those are fine. Those are consistent with what we saw in the first study. So that's sort of good. And then here's the one that I was most interested in is what do we see after instruction? So how do we look at their blood flow in their brain post-instruction versus pre? And so here we saw the areas that lit up, they're all in blue. And we saw posterior cingulate, frontal poles, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the angular gyrus. And when you look these up in a brain atlas, essentially what you get is these are areas that do things like narrative comprehension, semantic processing, and then this is my favorite one, the generating and manipulating mental images. Because if we think that models are built up of representations and they're there to mediate thought, they would take these things and use them and sort of manipulate them mentally. And so if this is an area that's active with modeling instruction students, this is all preliminary indicators that maybe we've got something here. And that study got written up in IFL Science, which was cool. And so then I'm going to talk just briefly about the third study, which is comparing the students from the modeling instruction class to the lecture class. And I just want to say that this has never been done. Like brain studies tend not to look at classes because it's too messy. And the inference that the class is exactly the thing that caused it is, I mean, that's overstepping from a causal standpoint, but it's the thing we ought to be trying, in my opinion, because if we really think that classes bring about learning, then we ought to be studying them. So this is the spicy burrito. And so we're going to look at basically four different things. We're going to look at, in all students, pre versus post. We're going to look at gender contrasts, and we're going to look at instructional contrast. And then we're going to try and look at interaction effects. And so what we know, well, let's just frame this up in terms of what we knew going in. What we know going in is that, all of the evidence suggests that we know that pre versus post, there's a big difference. That we know that there's a difference on the FCI for males versus females. And from the modeling instruction versus lecture classes, among the people that we put into the scanner, we saw no differences based on pre versus post. So those are the behavioral differences. And I'm going to talk about sort of three things. This slide might help with the control situation. Because when you look at the FCI versus the control there, that's the one I've already shown. But then we also have a couple of other types of questions. One, which is the physics knowledge. So do we know more, like, do they just recall more physics? And so in the middle there, it's a Hooke's law question. And then the control condition is on the right, and it's just about, do you recognize, is this a kind of car or something? And so it's similar visually, similar language, but a totally different thing. And then the last one is this transitive inference condition, where I'll let you read it and you kind of go, okay, I see how this makes some sense. There, the control condition is, I think, just to, and I don't remember this. I think it's just there to get at the reading level. But this is the kind of differences we're going to be looking at. So the main effect from pre versus post, did we see differences when we compare the reasoning condition to the control condition? And these are some of the areas. And so that's great. So we see significant differences based on time. So that's nice. Do we see differences in physics knowledge versus time? So are they able to recall Hooke's law more accurately? Yeah, we do see differences. And then on the transitive inference, this is sort of it's there as a comparison. because you could imagine that, hey, maybe we're just seeing differences, they went through a class, now they're better thinkers. We might see these differences all the time in every case. Maybe they just got smarter. And because in this transitive inference task, we see no significant changes in blood flow, then we take that as an indicator that, no, actually the changes that are happening are more likely as a result of taking class, not just that they somehow just got smarter. So those are the main effects for time. When we look for the main effects for sex, we look at the reasoning, and so in the pre and the post, we see differences among where in the red are places where females saw greater blood flow in these regions than males, and in blue we saw regions where the females saw greater blood flow than males. And so, I mean, what you might notice is that these are relatively sparse maps. There's not a lot of areas. So there seem to be a few differences, but not a ton actually. And which is interesting because the research on sex effects with the FCI are that females tend to have lower scores. So this is an interesting result. I don't fully know what to make of it. And then when we look for the main effects by class type, we see nothing. That was the slide. We didn't see class effect size. We didn't see differences in reasoning based on instructional approach, which was, to me, a little disappointing. I gotta be honest. You don't want to. The data are the data. You gotta treat them that way, but you sure do want them to work out one way versus the other. And we just didn't see it, and that was surprising. And so then when we go and look for interactions, so for example, are females in the modeling instruction class doing better? Are the males? Do we see differences based on these types of permutations? And so what we see is that there were some in the modeling instruction class, females increased blood flow in a variety of places, and in the lecture environment, the males showed similar increases. Whereas in the modeling instruction class, males showed some decreases, and in the lecture class, females exhibited some decreases. And it's hard to put together. It's hard to work through all of the different possibilities of how this works. Yeah.
Were the classes run in parallel?
Yeah.
Semester, same instructor, or is it?
No. Well, okay. So to get to 107, we had to run this for 4 years because it takes about an hour and a half per person to do each of the scans, and so you're just sort of limited on time. So I think the most we ever scanned in one semester was 25 or 30. So it's just, it's a slow process. So so anytime we were comparing students that are in all from the same university, roughly equivalent in terms of measurable, that FCI pre-scored, all kinds of things.
And this was the in-person.
Yeah, this was pre-COVID. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so they're not done parallel. It's not the same instructor. Those are things we can't control. I mean, just because we are in a real environment. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Going back to the student in the MRI, are the questions all visual, or are there any auditory?
No, we used all visual. Some studies use auditory and do different things that way. We use all visual.
My experience teaching younger students is that's a huge difference.
Yeah, no question.
Especially now.
Well, I should also remind you that this took place in South Florida, where the population, 70% of South Florida speaks two languages at home. So these are dual language processing people by and large. I don't know that for sure, but statistically that's definitely. So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting language things. But that's why we include some of those controls is to.
So you didn't see a brain difference between modeling, instruction, and lecture. Did you look at the MCI scores?
Yes, and they're different. You know, like behavior, like when we take the class FCI scores, yes, they're different, and they're markedly different. It's a fairly large difference, but you don't see it in the same. No, that's what you get.
So if you're using the same part of their brain, whether you're going to get the right answer or the wrong answer.
Well, yes, and what's exciting then is that suggests that they are reasoning. And that tells us a lot about, you know, hey, don't just rely on physical intuition. Don't just rely on compiled thinking. You have to actually acknowledge that they're engaging these reasoning processes, whether they get it right or whether they get it wrong. And so it's not just that they don't know, they're reasoning incorrect. I mean, that's the instructional implication of this, right? Yeah.
Yeah, quick question. If you look at the original enrollments, I noticed that the lecture class was about 50-50 male and female, but the modeling was split about 60-40. Could that be a confounding factor, or are lecture and modeling still equivalent after that?
So we were very purposeful because we knew this is the only project I've ever had where NSF was like, actually, we don't think we gave you enough. They said one of the things that the reviewers wanted was they wanted this gender thing, but it's $750 per participant. So you're really limited on budget. So they gave us extra money because they wanted the gender component. So we were very purposeful in the way we recruited to get balanced gender. That did not reflect the classroom.
That's just whoever registers.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only ones that are right ones.
It's possible that one of the reasons for the difference between male and female is that females are usually more nervous.
No, and actually, so we did a lot of stuff, right? And one of the things, and I'm not talking about it today, but one of the things we did is we administered an anxiety scale, a math science anxiety scale, and we did see some gender differences there. And I didn't look at them in preparation for today, so I don't remember them. But we don't think that anxiety is the thing that explains.
This is going to be an odd question. I've been through a few MRIs for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
I felt it very much depends on the time of day you're in that machine. And all of these studies at the same time of day, some of them are sequentially from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
No, it's when we can get them. So research MRIs, you have to schedule a week in advance. And so you say, oh, we can get a 4-hour block on Thursday afternoon. And so we do as many as we can do on a Thursday afternoon.
But you try to standardize at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
You try, but you also have to go when the machine's available and when the students are available. So we did not control for time for sure.
I would wonder, like being the model, the 10,000 hours that to develop some skill. Is this too short a time to see a difference? Did you throw professors in here and see where their heads were?
Yes. So that was, yes, we did. There's a funny story about an adverse, it's not funny actually. We threw professors in and we got them in. This was the first time. So my colleague Angela Laird, who's a badass neuroscientist, physicist, this was the first time she had just come from Texas to Florida. We were working together. She's like, let's do a study where we then compare to experts and do this exact thing because that's the right question to ask. and we were doing it, and this is all governed by human subjects research, right? And so we were going along and we got an adverse result, which means that we scanned their brains and we found something in a professor's brain. And the IRB immediately shut down the study. So, because we have to go tell them, and we're not medical doctors, we're not diagnosticians. We're like, well, we are ethically obligated to tell you about this. And so it was like the second or third professor we had scanned. And so we couldn't continue. So, and these things are dependent on the machine. And so it's a long story of logistics from there on. But yeah, we got it shut down because they wouldn't endorse it. We didn't have a good plan in place for what to do when you find something that you don't intend to find. Good for that professor. Anything else? I don't think I have another slide. Oh, yeah.
You didn't find those things on the student.
We didn't find any of those. No. Yeah. They were fine. I don't know that they were sane, but they were fine. We didn't see anything in their brain. So just to wrap up, these are the things. So we got this way of thinking about how science proceeds, developed curriculum to match that, and then looking for these neurobiological indicators of instructional differences. And we've got some preliminary understandings that reasoning doesn't necessarily equal correctness. I think that's an important result, is that we were able to look at activation patterns that indicated that these modeling students may be using models as part of their reasoning. We didn't see any differences by class, so that's counter evidence. And that these interaction effects are complicated, and there's not a consistent, coherent way of thinking about them that we can come up with, but maybe in the future. And so, as I mentioned, STEM anxiety was one of the things that we wanted to continue to look at. We want to try and use some of the network neuroscience approaches, because we think that there's plausibly co-activation networks that could be interesting to understand, and that we're trying to use these to correlate with external behavioral measures. And right after this study completed, I moved from Florida to Drexel, and so now we don't collaborate anymore, which is sad to me. So I'm trying to find new collaborators at University of Nebraska. And trying to add some. So hopefully there's a future in this. I think it's an exciting project. I think it's one I'm very, very proud of. I don't know what exactly to make of our findings, but I feel like if we're not doing this, we're missing out on some potential interesting stuff. And I don't think that we'll get there in my lifetime necessarily, but I think some of this, there's lots of development. So one of the questions you had is about the machine. A next step, there's these F-meters, which look like swim caps with infrared, and they do interferometry. And so they can scan down now to almost an inch deep into your skull. And so you can wear this, and you could have 2 or 3 people. And so you're no longer constrained to be in the fMRI, which is really an advantage. And then you're not limited to 4 buttons. You could have students writing or making diagrams or looking at things. So I think there's a lot there. Yeah.
For that, and fMRIs.
We did these. This started in 2016 and went through 2015.
Okay, so has there been improvements in that such that
No, I mean, this is not just a function of fMRI. This is a function of brain organization. Left-handed people's brains are just organized differently than right-handed brains. And I don't know, so I am not a neuroscientist, so I don't know, but I'll tell you this, which are, I don't know, I'm sure that part of the original rationale is that it's super expensive to do these studies, and left-handed people are less prominent or less prevalent in the population. And so if you study left-handed people, I mean, maybe you could get to critical mass of understanding left-handed people's brains. And you would think that they would do that, but somehow the tradition is that, and I don't know why. But it is a brain organization.
From the FCI, did they talk a lot about creativity?
What do you mean?
FCI depends on creativity.
Yeah.
Did you ever try improvements or whatever?
Yeah, and what we didn't see differences based on, you know, like how well they scored on tests.
Change that, improve it.
Yeah, we didn't, I guess we must have looked at change. And so, yeah, and since I don't know the answer, I'm pretty sure we didn't find anything, but you know, that could be, I just forgot.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like something, not a nailed down finding, but it sort of would support the idea that something special is happening in a group model session.
Yeah.
That explains the improvement on the MCI.
That could, I mean, there's a lot of, so I think of this as the kind of study that's going to open questions.
Yeah.
I'll open a lot more questions than it closes. And yeah, I agree with that. I think that's why these FNIRs with like in a group setting is the next thing I'm trying.
Right. So then I have a question about the future. Would there be a way to have an interface where you're doing a more open-ended thought process, where you're sort of constructing a model on a pad?
Yeah, and you'd need, but you can't do that in the.
Right.
I mean, there are very few studies that do writing things in the fMRI. They're very hard because when you write, you move, and that screws up your results quite a bit. It's very difficult to do writing. But these FNIR things, these are really promising, and it's a technology that's developing at Drexel. And so I'm really excited about it. The only problem is it only gets about an inch deep, but that's for many of the things, for many of the brain areas that we're talking about, that actually it would access it. So it's kind of.
For the students at the college level who were introduced to modeling, was that their first experience in life with modeling instruction?
Probably for the most part, yes, but not exclusive. Like we had an extensive group of teacher training workshops, so teacher education workshops that we did during the summers. And so a lot of the teachers in South Florida had been through our workshops, so we're using modeling. So to the extent we got students from South Florida, from the teachers that. So we think that the answer was about 20 or 30% of the students that came to our classes had been through a model.
The reason I ask is I didn't have access to any equipment, but in my career, I taught about 10 years ago, 39th graders, second semester waves, E&M, complete modeling for 14-year-olds, male, female. 4 months later, I happened to be teaching at Westchester University, and it was a summer class, and with permission, I gave the identical class to 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Who do you think achieved more gain? Not in an MRI, but in a sample FCI type.
I would guess that.
The younger kids were just more open to the idea of discussions, working in groups. The older students at the university level, and this was the summer class, they were expecting the lecture, the lab, the tech, So the modeling was completely alien to their thinking. What are you doing? This is a college class, So they were much more resistant. But by the end of the 6 weeks, and a self-evaluation at the university, about half the students said, this was fantastic, we didn't have boring lectures.
Yeah.
And then the other third or so said, where were the lectures?
Yeah.
That's my experience without the MRI.
So what's interesting about that is that I think that is changing. So that, when maybe they've not been through a modeling class, but they almost certainly had some active learning in one of their science classes. They're not sitting and listening to lectures. And so actually now when someone comes in and just sits in a lecture, that's the disruption. And that's changed over my career for sure, because we never had students that had done anything but sit through lectures.
We thought about, since a lot of that switched to modeling, and yes, it's modeling instruction, but also with the more wholesale adoption of NGSS at the high school level, since Pennsylvania just finally switched. Yeah. So have you thought about doing a study in like another 5 or 10 years, repeating it to be able to see what that change would be? Because you're going to have a whole generation of kids that have been exposed to modeling or phenomenon-based
Yeah.
same thing for much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we will be regressing out COVID effects for the rest of my career, for sure. So no, I don't think about that. There are lots of things I'd like to replicate. And this, I think that it would be, there's so many confounders there that it would be really difficult to say. But mostly I would say that that's COVID. I mean, if I were guessing at the leading candidate, that's. Did you have a question?